Welcome back, you're watching Storyboard. It's election season and that generally means increased viewership for television news channels. Exhaustive coverage also means that voters are now accustomed to a range of gadgetry, punditry and minute-by-minute scoring to a degree unequaled in the past. So what makes for good election coverage? Why do channels which are bleeding red still invest in expensive opinion polls? And most importantly, what does the viewer want? I spoke to IBN 18's editor-in-chief Rajdeep Sardesai to understand the science of electoral coverage on television. But before that, a quick disclosure, CNBC TV 18 is part of Network 18 that also runs IBN 18. Thank you so much for joining me on Storyboard.
Pleasure.
First question to you is, election time and even in general, editors carry a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Now, Sunday is counting day. You have 4 state elections, big 4 state elections, including Delhi, which is also big. What are the first, foremost things that go on in your mind during, counting day?
I think counting day is the most exciting day for any political journalist. Just the idea that you're in a live situation where the careers of politicians are made or broken, in a sense, is a great high. So I think the first thing is to just stay with the news as it's happening, because now counting day on television has become a 20-20 match. It starts at 8 o'clock, it's over by 11-12. Earlier I remember doing an election 20 years ago where it took 2 days before we knew who was winning, or maybe even longer, the general elections of 96. So I think the big difference is that counting days now are like 20-20 cricket, so you've got to be on top of the game and you've got to be constantly ready for news breaks. It's much faster now. So it's much more high energy perhaps than it was even 10-15 years ago.
But as the big face, as the big anchor on a news channel, how do you deal with it? Because you have your own personal biases, you also voted for somebody, you have your own dislikes and likes because you know these people so well. How do you deal with that? Because mentally you're probably happy or sad, but you have to present a balanced view. How do you deal with that?
I just enjoy politics. I think if you enjoy politics and electoral politics in particular, that enjoyment seeps through to the audience. I'm in the communication business. I want to communicate that enjoyment. I want to try and make it accessible to people, all these big numbers that are being thrown up. So that's my goal. Frankly, it doesn't make a big difference to me who wins or who loses. It really doesn't. Whoever I vote for in that election, at the end of the day, I just want to enjoy the idea of being part of this process of observing what's happening on counting day. So I really am, I would like to believe that I'm able to detach myself from all the surround sound and just focus on telling the story.
As a viewer, if you were to watch your own show on your own channel on election day, what would you like the viewers to take away apart from the numbers?
I think the big question is, everybody tells you what is happening. Everybody has the numbers. But why is it happening? To try and, as I say, make election analysis accessible to people. I think that's been the big failing in the past. That we throw numbers at viewers and expect them to digest those numbers without trying to explain to them why things are happening the way they are. Without shouting, without screaming, it's possible to do that. I've always enjoyed the way the BBC did. I grew up watching BBC for a long time on election night. They were wonderful. CNN has taken it to another level with their graphics. But I think the key at the end of the day is making elections accessible.
We're talking about banning opinion polls. There's so much written about it. And you blogged about this. You spoke about how in the UK there is regulation. I want to tell me, how important is it to get regulation into this? Because it's scientific for some people, but also a lot of people do it for political gains. So how important is it to regulate and not ban opinion polls?
Look, my sense is that a lot of opinion polls in this country have become teen patti. Look at what happened after the Delhi elections. People were still voting in Delhi elections and we had exit polls coming out. And in a tightly run race, that can go horribly wrong. Are we introducing enough statutory warnings? Are we doing enough of disclosure? I think all that is critical. So when I talk of regulation, I'm saying I think we need to be a little bit more honest with our viewers when we do these opinion polls or exit polls. Our credibility is at stake. Look, you could get it right or wrong. It's not a math sum. So opinion polls could go wrong. But at least if you're honest in your disclosure and telling the viewer what is your methodology, how did you do the poll, putting all the statutory warnings, that, that would be, to my mind, at least enhance the credibility of opinion polls. I think, if we continue down this path, then opinion polls are going to become teen patti, literally. And, that's not a great way to be doing opinion polls.
Here, in India at least, post polls, exit polls, they're all commissioned by media houses at a time where media channels are fighting for every rupee, and this is a very expensive exercise. Why does it make sense to do such elaborate post-poll surveys?
It's a brilliant question to which I have no answer. I really don't have an answer. I think we do it partly because of competitive pressures, partly because I still believe that if you do a good post-poll, you get a lot of information that can generate decent content. For example, in Chhattisgarh, the post-poll has told us how the vote is shifting in the Naxal areas. Now, our poll is showing there's a 5% switch away from the BJP, or certainly a 5% swing towards the Congress in the Naxal areas. Now, it may well turn out that it becomes 8-9% eventually, and the Congress wins and sweeps those areas. So people will say, oh, you got it wrong. But I do believe that that 5% swing that we measure through a poll in itself gives us an opportunity to examine, trends in that area. So I think as a trend spotter, post polls still have value. Providing academic rigor, they still have value. But if you're expecting
but does
value,
the viewer care? Because your viewership
the
figures
viewer
don't.
desperately wants to know the moment the polls have closed who's won, who's lost.
But does he care about so much analysis, or do we end up doing journalism for each other?
I've got a 24/7 animal which has to be fed.
Yeah.
And for the 3 days of elections, that's the biggest story. And because it's the biggest story, I'm looking for new ways in which I can keep that story going. And one of the ways is a poll.
If I'm not mistaken, do correct me if I'm wrong, the Election Commission found, I think, 20 to 22 cases of paid news Delhi election. How real is this problem of paid news during election, and how do you ensure transparency? Because it's all out about perception.
It's very difficult, because I think the viewers are imposing at times their own biases and prejudices on you. I remember we did a couple of programs on the Aam Aadmi Party, and suddenly we've been accused of being pro-Aam Aadmi Party. Someone else says we are pro-Modi and pro-BJP. Someone else says we are pro-Congress. Frankly, at the end of the day, we do not follow any agenda. That's the truth.
But is this a real problem of paid
But it
news?
is a problem. But it is a problem because the quality of people who are entering this profession, there is a significant decline. People are entering this profession just to make a quick buck. There are a number of people there, and elections is the time to make a quick buck. You're referring to paid news instances in Delhi. I'm told there are equal number of paid news instances, probably more in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan. And, there are all kinds of fly-by-night operators who see elections as an opportunity to either get government advertisements or to get advertisements from individual candidates. Again, it's a question of disclosure. If you are going to cover a particular candidate's speech for money, then you've got to say this speech is sponsored by, right? At the same time, viewers have to realize that if I show Narendra Modi's speech live, that doesn't mean I've taken money from Modi. I'm showing Modi's speech and Rahul's speech. Now, what do I do if Modi speaks for 1 hour and Rahul speaks for 18 minutes? That's not my fault. Then somebody will, jot it down and say, look, you covered Rahul for so many minutes, Modi for so many minutes.
And that has become worse with Twitter and social media.
Yeah, it has. Look, at the end of the day, all that a journalist has is his credibility. And it takes years to build, and to destroy it in 140 characters is, I think, unfair. You can tweet anything and say so-and-so is paid media, without evidence. I mean, just because one does an interview with the Aam Aadmi Party, that is no evidence to suggest that I'm pro-Aam Aadmi Party. Just because one shows a Narendra Modi speech live, that doesn't mean I'm pro-Narendra Modi. I think audiences and viewers have to recognize that if someone has built a career over 25 years, you couldn't have built it over, it's not something.
But Rajdeep, it's not only about you, it's also about a lot of other
as I said, the
journalists.
profession faces a credibility crisis. That's where the opinion polls come in, that's where paid news comes in, that's where I say have regulation. I remember when I was president of Editors Guild, we went, and the Chief Election Commissioner Dr. S.Y. Qureshi told us about this paid news problem during elections. We sat together, and to the credit of the Election Commission, they have now told their district officers that if you see evidence of paid news, it will be included as a corrupt practice. I would like to believe that in the last 3-4 years, as a result of that, the number of instances are actually declining. They still exist. But you need regulation. In India, there is no fear of the law. People will continue to abuse the law. Now, whether that is with paid news or whether that is with opinion polls. So all I'm calling for is greater transparency and greater regulation. I don't believe banning is the solution, but I do believe that given the credibility crisis that this profession faces, we need to make ourselves much more transparent in the way we operate.
There's a general fall in trust in news media. What do you think is the cause for this and what is the remedy?
Look, I think it works both ways. At one level, there is a fall in trust. At another level, there is a greater reliance than ever before. We are all over the place. So, every time news breaks, people do turn to television to find out the reality. So there is a far greater reliance at one level at what's happening. The flip side of it is that people today feel that a number of us are doing what we are doing for either TRPs or for drama or simply to create a sort of to create sensation.
But is that untrue?
I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair to label everyone and to paint everyone with the same brush. It's true about, I hate it when people say sab neta chor hai. I used to for a long time say hamam mein sab nange hain. Increasingly, I believe that's a very unfair way to look at people in public life. And I believe that's an unfair way to look at people in the media. There are decent people in the media and there are people who are taking shortcuts. And I think we need to make the difference.
Sunday will be a big day for all journalists. Remember, that's when we'll know who will form the government in Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Mizoram, and most important of them all, Delhi. Let's take another break here. Coming up ahead, why ICICI Direct is betting on a Facebook game to push brand recall.